The biting morning wind, whispering stories through the dirt alleys, found Arthur huddled under the awning of the old train station, one of the few shelters the village of São Benedito still offered him. His early 20s seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime, etched into his worn clothes and a gaze that, though tired, held an intensity few noticed. Arthur was a shadow, an almost invisible figure who moved with the discretion of someone who doesn't want to be seen or felt. He blended into the landscape, a forgotten part of the scenery, and at times, that was exactly what he wished to be. His deepest wound wasn't the hunger that gnawed at his stomach, but the invisible scar of an old rejection, a trauma that had taught him to distrust any kindness, to see traps in every extended hand. He dreamed of finding a safe place, a corner where loneliness wasn't his only companion, but his floor, his inner wall, was the conviction that the world was a stage of disappointments, and intimacy was a risk he couldn't take. He had resigned himself to silence, to the point where his own voice seemed strange, a distant echo of who he once was. It was as if words had lost their way, trapped in his throat, waiting for a moment that never came. He watched the world pass by, and the world in turn barely noticed him. Far away atop the hill that dominated the landscape stood the Almeida Prado mansion, a monument of stone and glass that contrasted with the bucolic simplicity of São Benedito. There lived Dr. Elias, a world-renowned neurosurgeon who had traded the aseptic corridors of large hospitals for the seclusion of a village. His son Leo, a 10-year-old boy, was confined to a wheelchair, a victim of a rare degenerative disease that defied all the science Elias commanded. The doctor, a man consumed by guilt and pride, found himself trapped in a desperate search for a cure, his brilliant mind clouded by despair. He wanted his son back, running across the damp lawns, but he feared failure, the verdict that his medicine was insufficient. His methods were rigid, scientific, and this inflexibility blinded him to solutions that escaped cold logic, isolating him from those who could truly help. He controlled every aspect of his son's life, from the meticulously calculated diet to sleep schedules, all in the name of a cure that seemed increasingly distant. It was a morning like so many others. Arthur, sitting in his corner, watched the first rays of sun break through the mist, painting the sky in orange hues. He pulled a small notebook from the pocket of his tattered jacket, its cover faded and pages yellowed. There he drew faces, imaginary landscapes, and sometimes loose words that formed small poems about the freedom he never had. It was his secret refuge, his only way to express himself without fear of judgment. The notebook was a piece of him, and he guarded it like a treasure, a fragile link to the inner world no one knew. And you who are joining me in this story, where are you watching this video from? Write your name and city in the comments. Your presence is very important to us. At that very moment, Leo, in the mansion, was carefully positioned in his wheelchair by an austere nurse. His eyes, once full of sparkle, now carried a melancholy that contrasted with the energy of his 10 years. He watched the window, the green grass stretching beyond the glass, a world he could barely touch. Dr. Elias entered the room with a clipboard in hand, reviewing the latest notes on medication and exercises. He spoke in complex medical terms, while his son merely nodded, already accustomed to the imposed routine. With each new day, hope diminished a little, and the father's despair transformed into even greater rigidity, almost a controlled desperation. Arthur unknowingly felt the lightness of the air rising up the hill, carrying with it the echoes of a pain he didn't yet understand. He saw luxurious cars coming and going, but never imagined the story unfolding behind those imposing walls. His own struggle was so overwhelming that it barely allowed him to look beyond his own survival. But destiny, or perhaps just chance, began to weave invisible threads between these two distinct worlds, threads that would one day become a complex tapestry, revealing truths no one expected. What could unite an invisible young man and a doctor who refused to see beyond science? The answer lay somewhere, hidden in the subtext of their solitary lives. Arthur's routine was a tangle of silences and observations. Every morning, the same search for food scraps, the same cold that gnawed at his bones, the same invisibility that protected and imprisoned him. He avoided glances, shunning all contact, as if fearing that the light of others would reveal too much of his own shadows. The notebook, his faithful companion, held the drawings that were the voice he dared not use, and each stroke was a sigh, a way to resist oblivion. He wondered if there would be a day when the world would finally see him, not as a shadow but as a person. But who would care about such a question? While Arthur huddled, Dr. Elias in his mansion fought a silent, desperate battle. Leo, his son, seemed to waste away a little more each day, and the most advanced treatments, the consultations with the greatest specialists, all proved useless. The disease, rare and relentless, consumed the boy's strength, and Elias felt guilt gnawing at his soul, a slow poison that prevented him from seeing beyond science. He controlled everything, from strict diet to physical therapy exercises, hoping that discipline could somehow reverse the inevitable. But hope for Leo was a bird flying farther and farther away. One afternoon, a rarity, Leo was taken for a stroll in the village's small public garden, a well-kept lawn with wooden benches and some leafy trees. The nurse, always attentive, pushed the wheelchair while Leo, with a lost gaze, watched the few children running and playing. He held a small wooden bird, delicately carved, a gift his mother had given him before she passed. It was his talisman, a link to the freedom he didn't have. But his fragile hand, weakened by the disease, couldn't hold the object for long. The wooden bird slipped and fell silently onto the grass, without the nurse or Leo himself noticing. Who could imagine that such a small object would carry such great weight? Arthur, on his usual rounds looking for something that could be reused, passed by the public garden. He avoided the place when there were many people, but that late afternoon the garden was almost empty. His eyes, trained to find what others discarded, noticed a small shape in the grass. It was the wooden bird. He picked it up, examining it with rare curiosity. It wasn't just any toy. There was a delicacy in the strokes, a care in the painting that revealed its sentimental value. He put it in his jacket pocket, a small unexpected treasure, without knowing where it came from or to whom it belonged. Days later, Arthur still carried the wooden bird. It had become a weight, a silent question in his pocket. He would sometimes take it out, observing the painted plumage, the slightly chipped wing. It was as if the object whispered a story he couldn't decipher. And then one grey morning, chance decided to act. As he rummaged through a trash can near the gate of the Almeida Prado mansion, he saw a luxury car stop. The nurse got out, opened the back door, and with almost reverent care helped Leo out of the wheelchair for a quick home medical consultation. Arthur saw the boy pale with large, sad eyes and noticed something familiar. Leo wore a necklace with a small pendant, a drawing of a bird. It was the same bird he had in his pocket, but in miniature, like a symbol. A cold shiver ran down Arthur's spine. Was it a coincidence or a sign? That small detail, the connection between the wooden bird and Leo's necklace, sparked a thought in Arthur's mind. It wasn't just a lost toy. It was something of Leo's, something he valued. The boy's pain, silent and visible on his face, struck a chord in Arthur, a chord he thought was dead. He felt a strange impulse, a desire to do something even without knowing what. It was the first time in a long time that something other than his own survival moved him. And have you ever found yourself in a situation where a small detail changed everything? A sign, a clue that made you see the world differently? Tell us in the comments using the hashtag #DemondHiddenTruth. Your experience is important to us. Your voice is part of this community that seeks to discover the truth behind appearances. Dr. Elias, oblivious to Arthur's gaze, intensified his research. He spent hours in his office surrounded by books and scientific articles, searching for an answer that seemed not to exist. With each new symptom of Leo's, with each small regression, Elias's despair deepened, transforming into an obsession that alienated him from everything and everyone. He barely noticed the nurse's fatigue, Leo's silent sadness, or the world outside. His mind was a labyrinth of formulas and diagnoses, and he was trapped in it, circling, unable to find a way out. He didn't know that the answer, or at least a path to it, was in the hands of a young man he didn't even know existed. Arthur found himself at a crossroads. The wooden bird now seemed to burn in his pocket. Return it? How? Go to the mansion? It was unthinkable for someone like him, a shadow. But not returning it meant keeping something that belonged to a boy who seemed to carry a burden as heavy as his. That object, so simple, had become the first obstacle in his path, the first invisible bridge between two worlds that should never meet. What would he do with that small piece of wood, and what would it mean for the future of both? The answer was not simple, and Arthur knew that for the first time in a long time, he would have to make a decision that went beyond his own survival. That object, so simple, had become the first obstacle in his path, the first invisible bridge between two worlds that should never meet. What would he do with that small piece of wood, and what would it mean for the future of both? The answer was not simple, and Arthur knew that for the first time in a long time, he would have to make a decision that went beyond his own survival. It was a test, a choice that could change the course of his life, or reaffirm the loneliness that had accompanied him for so long. And you, have you ever found yourself in a situation where a small detail changed everything? A sign, a clue that made you see the world differently? Tell us in the comments using the hashtag #HiddenTruth. Your experience is important to us. Your voice is part of this community that seeks to discover the truth behind appearances. Arthur spent the following days observing the Almeida Prado mansion from a safe distance. Hidden among the trees that bordered the dirt road, he saw the luxury car leave and return, the employees moving like gears of an expensive clock, and occasionally Leo's fragile figure being taken for a short walk in the internal garden. Every movement, every detail was absorbed by his attentive eyes, which before only sought threats, and now seemed to search for something more, a connection. He noticed Dr. Elias's rigidity, the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders, always with a serious, almost distant expression. It was as if his pain was so great that it left no room for anything else. Arthur's curiosity grew, but fear was too high a wall to climb. He remembered the times he had tried to approach someone in the past, and the pain of rejection had deeply marked him. The harsh words, the looks of contempt, all came back like a ghost whispering that he was not worthy of help, of attention. Why would it be different now? The risk of exposing himself, of being seen, and worse, of being sent away, was immense. His safety, his invisibility, were the only things he truly possessed. But the wooden bird in his pocket seemed to have a life of its own, a small weight pulling him out of his comfort zone. On the park benches, Arthur overheard the village murmurs. The ladies talked about the tragedy of the Almeida Prados, the doctor's son who had no hope, the fortune that couldn't buy health. There was a tone of pity, but also a certain distance, as if the family's wealth isolated them from common compassion. They said Dr. Elias was a good man, but that pain had transformed him into someone intractable, closed off in his own suffering. He was seen as a genius who, ironically, couldn't heal his own home. Arthur felt the truth in those words, the truth of a man trapped in his own quest, perhaps as lonely as himself. What could happen when two such different solitudes met? The pressure of his own conscience was the highest emotional cost. The wooden bird had become a burden, a responsibility Arthur never wanted. Returning it was an act of kindness, but also of vulnerability. What if he was misunderstood? What if they accused him of theft? Arthur's mind raced in circles, caught between the desire to do what was right and the paralyzing fear of judgment. He felt his stomach tighten, an old sensation he knew well, the prelude to a difficult decision. One day, as Arthur hid near the mansion's service entrance, he saw one of the gardeners discard a pile of trash. Among the dry leaves and empty packaging, something caught his attention. It was a small metal picture frame, dented and without the photo, but next to it, almost hidden, was an old, slightly faded photo of a smiling boy, with brown hair and bright eyes running across a lawn. It was Leo a few years earlier, full of life without the wheelchair. Arthur picked up the photo, feeling the paper between his fingers. It was such a different image from the pale boy he saw today. The contrast was painful, and the image of that healthy Leo fixed itself in his mind, reinforcing the urgency that the wooden bird had already planted. Leo's vibrant and energetic photo joined that document. Now in his hands was the missing piece, but at the same time it opened an abyss of new questions. Was Dr. Elias subjecting Leo to an experimental treatment with unforeseen risks? And why so much secrecy? The envelope also contained a small business card for the lawyer with a phone number and an email. It was concrete proof that something much more complex and dangerous was happening behind the mansion walls. Elias's search for a cure seemed to have turned into a risky gamble, and Leo was the only one paying the price. Arthur felt a chill down his spine. He held not just lost objects, but secrets, and secrets like these could be dangerous. What would he do now with this new truth? The truth, so feared and so sought after, now weighed in his hands, heavier than the wooden bird itself, clearer than Leo's photo. Arthur stood at a moral crossroads. To ignore it would be a betrayal of his own conscience, a surrender to the invisibility that imprisoned him. But to act, to seek out the lawyer, meant exposing himself in a way he never imagined. It meant abandoning the shadows, facing the world head-on. And that was a terror that had accompanied him since childhood, a visceral fear of being rejected, of being hurt. What was worth more? The safety of his solitude or the chance to help a boy he barely knew, but whose pain touched him so deeply? That letterhead paper, with its fine print about risks and side effects, seemed like a silent cry from Leo. Arthur felt the urgency, the need to act, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground, his voice muzzled by fear. He spent the night sleepless, the document and the lawyer's card in his hands, the wooden bird and Leo's photo beside them, like silent witnesses to his anguish. It was an internal battle between the Arthur who wanted to hide and the Arthur who felt a flame of justice ignite in his chest, a warmth he thought he had lost long ago. The next day, a timid sun tried to break through